So I'm going to give a little bit more of a background about who I am and why I talk about e-portfolios. Probably not as much as I used to. I used to be paid full-time, like Christina, to talk about e-portfolios. So when people used to ask talk to my children about, their mother, my daughter used to say, my mum does e-portfolios. She didn't have a clue what that meant, but she knew that I said that word a lot, and she knew that that was kind of important. But my journey with e-portfolios started in 2007. I had worked, I'm from Australia, I work in what they call the vocational education and training sector. So they've given us an acronym called VET. So when you're trying to Google it, it doesn't come up all that well. But it's basically the wedge further education. So it's tertiary, it's not quite higher education, it's not quite school, but we transcend both. We have certificate 1 up to advanced diplomas and graduate certificates. So we transcend both sectors. But I had worked in the vocational education sector in a large public training organisation that I didn't know at the time, but I found out very quickly, had quite a clear pathway for lecturers in that area. That each year you progressed, if you did enough hours, you got the next pay scale, but then you hit a ceiling, and for you to get past and over that ceiling, you had to actually demonstrate your work from the last 5 years. So when I had this conversation with my manager, she said, I think you're ready to be going to this next level. You'll need to create a portfolio of evidence of your work from the last 5 years. And I thought that that was really strange. I thought if she knew that was my pathway, how come she hadn't helped me collect evidence along the way? And why was I now spending 100 hours recreating a portfolio of evidence? At the same time, a report came out from what was called the Australian Flexible Learning Framework called e-portfolios, and how people really need to be managing their own learning and their own artefacts. And I was living evidence of it, and I was quite mad with my situation. But when I found out about this concept of e-portfolios, I really become an evangelist ever since. Because what I've learned as I've got older is that the future will want to know about my past. So if I can help people start to gather and manage their own learning now, that when that future asks about the past, that they'll at least be a little bit more prepared and they won't have to do that 100 hours worth of work. And so with all of that evangelist, they let me run the e-portfolio project for the vocational education and training sector for 4 years. So I got to travel for 4 years and talk to people about e-portfolios, which was really exciting. But like any government project, that money ran out. And so I still kind of hold the light for e-portfolios in general. And I'll show you some of that activity we do in Australia towards the end of the presentation. But also about a lifelong learning and helping empower people through e-portfolio processes. There's a big fly or something just going around there. If you are interested in the slides, they're up on slideshare.net under my company name. So if you want to record that, and what will happen soon, if you're into Twitter, there'll be a link to it through the Twitter feed as well. So slideshare.net/Vanguard Visions will get you to these slides. So let me just start with the topic is increased student motivation and reducing cheating using Mahara. So in the time I've been involved in e-learning since about 2005, in that time people have been very excited and very evangelistic about e-learning as a flexible tool that allows people to do some really, really wonderful stuff. And people do get really excited, and they should. There's some good reasons. I was able to get my Masters of Learning and Development as an online student. So as a full-time working mother with 2 children and a busy social life, that was the only way I was going to be able to get a Masters, is to be able to do it when there was that much window of time in any given day. So e-learning, fantastic. But in our sector, in the vocational education training sector, we're monitored. We have a national body. They're called the Australian Qualifications Skills Authority. We call them ASQA, an acronym. The utopia of flexible e-learning, allowing flexible learning, though, has a dark side, that people don't trust e-assessment. They don't trust it. How do you know it's the person that's doing the work? So there's always been this kind of the utopia of e-learning, but with the dark side of e-assessment. And my theory has been, and I think it can be proven for a number of years, that assessment drives learning. I'm sorry, but it does. It shouldn't. But in formal education and training, assessment, we usually start with what do we want them to look like at the end. This is the picture, kind of a picture of competence. This is what they're going to look for at the end. And if you know anything about Kathy Moore and action mapping and learning design, that's the way you should start. What is it that you want the person to look like at the end? What activities will they need to do to get to that position? What content do they need to do those activities to get to that position? And so if people were seeing e-assessment as a dark side and therefore weren't touching it, especially if they were told the auditor, aka ASQA, would be coming in and slapping them and therefore taking their accreditation to teach away, then they wouldn't do the e-learning because there was no kind of driver there for them. I wasn't the only one that recognised that. There's been a number of research, some research done through what is then the National Vet e-learning strategy into finding out about e-assessment, the risk management. We live in a very risk management world, very risk averse world. So the National Vet e-learning strategy funded a risk assessment of e-assessment within the vocational education and training sector. What they found is a whole range of different stuff. So it's a really good report if you're having to grapple with the same issue around e-assessment, right down to really technical stuff about how you can set up technical systems that monitor who the person is and so on. So it's got some really good stuff in here. Being a passionate educator and not so much a techie, I kind of looked at it from the teacher's or the educator's perspective. And what came of that is that really the best way to try and reduce the kind of cheating or the bad stuff that e-assessment might sort of allude to is to actually motivate learners, make learners want to do the learning, and therefore why would they cheat? Why would they go and get their auntie or brother or find a copy on the internet and then cut and paste it into the work that they do? So what the paper talks about, or the report talks about, is a WIFM. What's a WIFM? What's in it for me? All right? And it's really interesting from a business perspective because, like Pasquale, the last couple of years I've moved out of the beautiful world of education and training into the real world of the business world, and I have to think about how I interact with people differently because I'm now kind of seen as the evil vendor as opposed to a passionate educator. And so I think a lot about when I'm doing something for people, what's in it for them? Any change management process. If you're going through any change management process, you need to convince the people who need to change, who don't want to change, what's in it for them. So it's, basically what it is we need to help students understand if they're going to do any kind of formal assessment, that what's in it for them. This isn't just about ticking boxes. And I think we miss that sometimes in assessment. We're so concerned about what we need to tick off in our boxes and tell our whoever we're reporting to that we forget to explain to them how they're going to benefit. The report then come up with kind of from an educational perspective. So there's a whole range of technical things you can do. So I said the guide's quite intense. It's got a lot of information in there about how you can manage e-assessment as a system, as an organisation and so on. But from an educational perspective, they said there's 4 ways that you can actually help increase a student's motivation, thereby reducing their need to cheat, is when you actually interact with the students. So some previous work done around e-assessment found that the biggest, I'll ask the audience, what do you think the biggest form of e-assessment was when they did research? I think it was about 2011. So online, what was the biggest form? Those people who are helping people do Moodles, what was the biggest form of e-assessment that was happening in the vocational education training sector? The online quiz. Online quiz. Right? So the online quiz, ideally, online quizzes can actually be a really great form of assessment if they're designed well, but then very rarely designed well. So you need to reduce cheating or help students be motivated, instead of just clicking the A, B, C, D, A, B, C, D, whatever it might be, is that you need to talk to them in some way. You need to interact with them in some way, and then you start to bond a relationship with them. You get to understand who they are, so you understand a bit of their idiosyncrasies, and they're less likely to disappoint you because they know you. They have a relationship with you. They don't want to disappoint you. The other one, and as again from a passionate educator, varied assessments that are real and applied just seems like common sense. But I work in a sector where when you ask people what they do, even though they're educators, teachers, lecturers, whatever they're called across the sector, when you ask them what they do, they'll tell you their vocational trade before that they're a teacher. So if I say, what do you do? Christina would say IT. Stephen, what would you do? He's a plumber. But you're paid full time to teach people. And so they don't have an educational background. What was it, Stephen? You said this morning you teach. Yeah, right. So they would teach the master apprentice. The plumbers teach the master apprentice kind of approach. And lots of people love the online quizzes. So we're sort of setting people up for cheating. The other is about peer activities. Who in your organisation freaks out when you suggest to them that their students should do group work? Right? Most of them. Who in this room only works on anything they do on their own in the workplace? So, why wouldn't we? Why wouldn't we say to people, you have to work together? I know it's hard, all right? And we used to do a lot of group activities with students. They say, I don't want to be in that group. They don't do this and they don't do that and haven't turned up. I said, well, in the workplace, you'll have two choices. You'll either work it out or you'll leave. What do you want to do now? Okay? So why aren't we then modelling, especially if you're from a sector that's keen to give people workplace skills, make sure that people have peer activities. And I'll talk to you a little bit about some of the wonderful things that Mahara can do. And then finally, self-assess. Get people to self-assess. Now, in higher ed in Australia, they call it reflection. If you were to go to the tradies, the plumbers or the carpenters and say, I want you boys to reflect, they would say, go away, little blonde lady, you don't know what you're talking about. But if you say to them, I want you to ask them, what have they done, why have they done it, and how might they apply it somewhere else, they think that's a great idea, because they'll have to work out whether they've done a good job and whether they can use this knowledge somewhere else. So it's really important skills that they need as general human beings, but also it will solve some of our issues in terms of motivation and cheating. So obviously Mahara is a really, really, really powerful tool, and with the great work of the Mahara team, it's only getting more powerful in what you can do. Now in that, it's massive, right? In terms of how the amount of kind of different ways that you can pull things together to create something is huge. Now that freaks people out completely. So it's a really, really fabulous tool. And so here are some of the things that I've kind of matched up with what you can do when you look at that research that's talking about e-assessment generally. So you could apply this across a few e-learning environments to Mahara. And the first one is the profile, which is probably where most people start anyway. The resume features of there. Find out what these people can do. I come from a sector that will actually give you credit if you have already got the skills and knowledge. And technically, we're supposed to ask you about those skills and knowledge even before we bring you in for any training, so that we're not trying to teach you how to suck eggs. And we will give you credit. We will assess you before you even walk into any of the classrooms to find out different ways of doing that. So sometimes that doesn't happen, or it hasn't happened as efficiently. So by you finding out really early on what is it that your learners have done and know and experienced, you might be already able to fast track them or give this unit to them as a credit and move them on to the next unit or subject that you're doing. So, the other two things I was thinking about there is sometimes education and training is an intangible asset, intangible purchase. I can't touch it, I can't see it, I can't eat it. It's not a chair, it's not a car, it's not a laptop. It's very hard for me to compare what course I'm doing with another course. So we've actually had students who've gone into a focus group for something completely different and told us that they're in the wrong course. So we might find that through finding out a little bit more about our learners that they're not even supposed to be doing this course. That if you're like us and they only get a certain amount of government money to do training, that you shift them into that other training location and they get the training that they're actually looking for. The other thing is this, I think about empathy. A colleague and I talk about this a lot. Really, the number one asset of any skill of any teacher is you need to have empathy for your students. Who's done any formal training or education and training in the last 12 months? Now, do you have increased empathy for your students? Absolutely. Right? If you haven't pushed yourself in the last 1 to 5 years through any formal education where you have to do formal assessments, please put yourself through it, even if it's only for a short period of time, because it's bloody hard. All right? I did my masters the first subject I did my masters, I told nobody. I thought that way if I drop out or fail, I'm the only one that'll know. Not even my husband, I didn't tell. I handed in my first assessment, I was sweating. I had been in education for 20 years. I had taught other people, but I was so stressed out about whether or not I was going to get a grade or pass or fail, and I'm thinking this is a terrible experience. So adults are feeling like that, especially if they've never done any educational training for a long time post-school. So it gives us an empathy about who they are, what their lifestyles are, and so we understand who they are, and so therefore we can talk to them and we build the relationship, and they're less likely to cheat on us, a bit like our families. It's got to be real and applied. It's not very clear there, but the University of New South Wales, if you Google UNSW or University of New South Wales e-portfolio assessment tasks, so they talk about a whole different range of ways that you can use e-portfolios, and I'm not going to go through them because I think people have done that over the last day and 3/4. So, and there's a link to that Mahara page if you want to have a look at that one in particular. But what I also do is talk to people about education and training in general, and I'm a really big advocate of this thing called learning-centred approaches. Who's heard of learner-centred approaches? Who's heard of learning-centred approaches? Beautiful, right? You and I, 3 of us need to team up. So Brown, Chen and their colleague, I can never remember who the 3 of them are, is the first time I come up through there's the International Journal of ePortfolio. People know about the International Journal of ePortfolio. So they wrote a paper a few years ago and talked about this learning-centred, where people actually learn how to learn. Right? And this is what education and training should be about. It's about people now learning how to learn. So a bit what Mark was talking about this morning. And this requires applied and real kinds of activities. So there's a whole gamut of ways that we can introduce that to our students. Any there that you'd like me to go over? Beautiful. Service industries, when you go into your service area, it's a bit like work integrated learning. So there's a whole range of ways that we can do this and make things really authentic rather than regurgitate. Sorry, I'm just going to... All right, so then you've got the peer activities. And I do think that the group in Mahara can often be a hidden kind of gem. So some of the get to know you. So online, I use an icebreaker, so I still use online icebreakers, getting to know you kind of stuff. We use the discussion forums where people can talk about a particular topic. I've seen groups used where students create their own groups and start their own communities of practice and start their own collaborative stuff. Ellen Marie Murphy wrote a book a couple of years ago called the Mahara Cookbook. You heard anybody talk about it recently? Yeah, you still refer to it? I mean, it's at 1.4, but it doesn't really matter what version of it is. It's the concepts that she's introduced. So she talked about using it as a newsletter, where students had access to create pages within there as a kind of like their class newsletter. And then they would allow their parents to come in and have a look what was happening through there. So there's lots of ways that students can work together. Obviously the critiquing part of Mahara is wonderful, where they can add feedback to one another on each of their pages. So there's lots of different ways that we can use Mahara to actually increase peer activity. And then that final one, the self-assessment one, I've just pulled a journals page. There's no self-assessing on that page. I've just pulled it out of my own e-portfolio demonstration around assessment, e-assessment. So self-assessment's really important. I think, again, the journal's key to that. But we don't just give them the journal, they need a structure. Does anybody ask their students to reflect or do self-assessment? Okay. All right, so anybody thinking about asking their students to reflect or do self-assessment? Maybe, yes. Give them a structure, all right? We talk about it a lot in education training. Oh, it's really good to reflect, it's really good to self-assess. They don't have a clue what that is. So there's things like star L, so star L or star N. Queensland Uni of Tech, I haven't got a board to write some of this down. Queensland Uni of Tech, QUT, star L or star N. So where you give them a structure, what's the situation, what's the task, what's the activity, what's the result, what did you learn? Or the one I gave them before, very simple. I used to not give my students a grade until they told me, what did you do, why did you do it, and how might you do it differently or use it somewhere else? And when they've given me that little 3 sentences or 5 sentences, I would give them their grade of what they've done. But get them to think about what is it they're doing, because then it might become interesting to them, then they might understand why they're doing it, and then they might put a little bit more effort or energy into it.
I think for at least some of the assessment what we do at tertiary level, there is that disconnect between what I'm doing for assessment and why should I do it. Like what does it mean to me to do that? Quite often, but sometimes it leads to a bit of a disconnect.
Yeah. Because
I think it's maybe less so in the vocational kind of.
No, I think we still push them through industrial model very much, right? Monkey see, monkey do, tick, move on. So we still have a lot of that. Some you can't get away with that. Like I don't like to be a hairdresser or to be an electrician. You might need a bit more, but we still do a lot of production line stuff. But never ask them what have they done and why have they done it, and will you use this again in the future, or will you change what you've done? And for a lot of, well, for most occupations, you want people to be going through a continuous improvement cycle. You know, on a daily basis, what have I done? You know, you've taken 2 days out of your life to come and be part of a conference. Do you not reflect on whether or not that was worth you being here, and that you will apply it somewhere in the future? Most activities, short activities that I do, I usually get people to write down one action. Write down one action that you're going to do at the end of this, because if you write down, you're more likely to do it. So getting people to think about why am I here, what am I doing, how might I use it in the future is a skill that they need. And again, it's going to be a lot harder if somebody's got their auntie to write that paper. It's going to be a lot harder for them to answer those questions than if you just read the paper. And what we see is this win-win, and this is the WIFM, right? Sometimes the assessments really are for us because we have hurdles that we have to jump through, and we have to demonstrate it to our bodies or whoever it is that we have to demonstrate it to. But with an e-portfolio, the wins are just amazing. But do we sell those wins? So there's a gentleman called Don Prasant. He's in Canada. He's a big advocate in the North America around e-portfolios, and he does a lot of work with people looking for employment, a lot of immigrants looking for employment. They use Mahara. It's called savvyfolio.net. You put the bit.ly link in, it will tell you, or email me. And the notes I had, so wherever I found this, the notes I had said that this woman partially got a job because of her e-portfolio. And that's one of the a lot of the magical questions we get asked around e-portfolios is, you know, does it really help them get the job or get the promotion or get them, beautiful, or get them to the next course or get them a grant that they want to apply for. So there's a whole range of WIFMs or the promotion that they might want to do. So it's really important that we explain to students that it's not just the new assessment Dropbox. All right? Mahara's not just moved from Moodle to Mahara or Blackboard or whatever you're using, that this is really good for you externally, so there's a kind of tangible thing you can show somebody else, and some of those intrinsic stuff that will help them be able to learn how to manage their own learning. We do a lot of feeding them fish. We give them all the content, we structure all the activities, we tell them when they're passed, or we call it competent. We tell them that. We don't ask them whether they're competent or not, so they don't have a clue what we're assessing them on. And then we send them out. All right, so we give them a lot of fish. What we don't do is spend the time teaching them to set themselves a learning goal, work out what resources and activities they need to do to achieve that goal, determine when they've reached that goal, so what kind of criteria they need to self-assess against, and then use that in a whole range of different situations, not just in formal education. So another win-win if you take an approach, an e-portfolio approach. The other thing for those people who might be new to Mahara or still interested in finding more resources, what I found over the years is e-portfolios are generally private places, and people find it hard to see examples, especially if you're trying to explain it to somebody else. They will say, well, show me. All right, I get the kind of conceptual, but show me. So over the years what I've done is I follow Christina's Everything Mahara on Digo, so that's one way of keeping up to date. But what I've done is I've dumped a whole range, and will continue to, after the last 2 days, a whole range of links to different resources that are Mahara portfolio related. So there's a link there if you want to have a look. I'm just going to wind up with what we're doing in Australia. With the encouragement of Christina, going to facilitate our first, well, what I've called Australian Mahara User Group, Do We Need One? Because it's sort of not come organic from the community, it's kind of come from two advocates of the community saying we need a user, and that's not a good community practice. So we're going to have a coffee meeting in Adelaide next Friday to discuss. We've got about a dozen people who are going to come along and have that conversation, and the wonderful Christina is going to help facilitate that conversation. That came out of because we're having a Moodle Mahara meetup, because I think we need to talk about Mahara as part of an e-learning ecosystem, that it's not just sort of this kind of shining light. A lady called Wendy Harper said at a presentation years ago that it wasn't the Holy Grail, and I nearly fell through the floor. I thought, what is she talking about? Of course it's the Holy Grail. But for those people that don't get it, and there's a lot of more people who don't get it than do get it, then we need to wrap it in around an e-learning ecosystem. So we'll be doing that. We also are tool agnostic. So we have an organisation called ePortfolios Australia. It's a free professional network. We'll run 2 webinars this year, so anybody can attend. I think they start at like 4:30 on the East Coast, so it's kind of still sociable for New Zealanders to be part of. And this year, the event's in Perth, which isn't so sociable for New Zealanders to be part of. And we've done these forums, the forums for 3 years, the conferences for a couple more, so there's actually a whole gamut of e-portfolio resources that are free and available online there. Thank you, Christina. I have finished. So there's my, they've got time to ask questions. No, I've talked the whole time. Right, sorry. My contact details if you would like to be in contact, and if you're on Twitter, you've probably already seen me on there too. So, thoughts about Mahara and its potential to motivate, or aka reduce cheating in learners.
This is a question we get asked from time to time, like, for example, a common one is link Mahara externally.
Yes.
Which sort of shows what kind of assessment people are thinking of.
Yeah. So that's not real and applied. It's an essay or something on those sorts. And there's a colleague, Michael Coughlin, who says you should design assessment for cheating. Right? Design it knowing that they're going to, and it's usually only the 0.01% who's going to do it, but design it knowing that students can cheat, and so don't make it so it's bloody, excuse my language, easy for them to cheat. Right? Make it so that it has to have some sort of individual approach to it, and therefore the chance of them cheating reduces so much more. And the thing is, I'm doing some tutoring at the moment, and it was really interesting. I had to mark 23 of the same paper that had the same sort of required answers. Now, in the end, I really couldn't remember whether or not there was plagiarism, or whether because the bloody answer was so much the same, they all sounded exactly the same, I wouldn't be able to tell who was plagiarising or not, except for one, or two, sorry, where they were both identical. So that's the other part of this, is we won't need so much of a Turnitin if we're not designing things where by the 5th or 6th one we can do it with our eyes shut, and we don't know whether they've cheated or not, because it's so much the same. Any other issues around motivating students? Beautiful. All right, so enjoy the last session, and I've enjoyed other people's sessions, and thank you, Christine, and again for allowing us to. Thank you. Thank you.